Hi, everyone. This is Yoav Gutman. Today, I'm going to be reviewing Chapter 6, Incubation Roles in the Beyond the Champion book. We will be exploring how to build your incubation team and the roles that make up that team. But before we dive into it, I want to review the Entrepreneur's 10 Commandments. There's a few here that I really think are important for the incubation team, especially come to work each day willing to be fired and find people to help you. I think those are really important for the incubation team, as we'll see. And just a little bit more review. We're, of course, talking about this middle section here, incubation, that falls right between the discovery and acceleration stages of your innovation strategy. And so we're really going to be honing in on what the team is all about, how the authors have suggested that you build your innovation team. Why innovation and incubation? So we're going to actually look at the roles through looking at PepsiCo. And the example from PepsiCo is about Indra Nooyi, who became the CEO of PepsiCo in 2006. And she wanted to reclassify their products into 3 categories to try to move it into the brand or the company into more of a healthier lifestyle. The 3 new categories are fun for you. You can think of these are as the traditional, chips that you love, Pepsi, those kinds of things. Better for you, like healthier chip brands and diet sodas or, 0-calorie sodas. And then good for you, which is kind of the more healthy stuff, the more healthy foods like oatmeal. And one of the reasons she wanted to do this is to move corporate spending out of junk foods and into healthier alternatives. And she recognized that the company needed to innovate to do this. So, of course, where does innovation come from? Acquisitions is one option, and they certainly were doing that. But she wanted to move the company to a place where they were innovating from within, where ideas came from within. Now, that's really hard to do, especially if you don't have the talent there. So one of the first things she did is hired from the outside. Dr. Mehmood Khan was hired as the chief scientific officer. Now we will learn later, is what we call the I3, or the director of the incubation team. He, of course, went on to hire the I2, which we'll address shortly, the new business platform leader, Dina Bradley, who became the VP of Global Nutrition R&D. Global Nutrition was a new group that they set up specifically for this. And of course, then she hired or pulled from other departments direct reports that are called I1s, new business creation specialists. Now, this looks a little hierarchical for innovation, especially when you consider how popular flat organizational structures are, especially in startups and in entrepreneurship. Oftentimes, you're trying to get that startup feel. However, there are some issues with flat structure the authors found. Those being who has the decision, bottlenecks, the executive champion may not exist, and you're a little too slow to react in the experiments. Alternatively, hierarchy is a more successful model for innovation and incubation because everyone knows who owns what. They can be quick to react. You can reduce bottleneck, and experience and data wins the day. So when you're building your team, go with the hierarchical structure. Now, in terms of how to actually build a team, we're going to start from the bottom up with the new business creation specialist. So if we revisit our friends at Pepsi, these are the folks at the bottom. And they're really the people that I think, they're kind of on the ground, they're doing the work. And I think this quote sums up a lot of what makes them who they are, what they do. Traditional project management tools such as Gantt charts don't apply when the resolution of one uncertainty guides the next set of actions. And what we'll see here is that you can't run experiments, this experiment this week, another experiment next week. You have to just see what happens this week, and then how does that guide the experiments next week? And that's really in conflict with Gantt charts if you've ever seen kind of those project management approach. In terms of responsibilities of the new business creation specialists, they're really there to take on the identified opportunity from the discovery portfolio and test. There are 2 models for this. The authors found you can have the I1 support all the incubation projects, or they can be dedicated to a specific project and operate as part of the core team for that project. Either way, what do they do? They're the people that are there to answer the questions. What the question is, where do we build a new factory? They're looking at the resources, the talent, the raw materials, everything that's involved to come with an answer to that question. They're guiding the team through the cloud of uncertainty. They're articulating the technology, the marketing, the resources, and really they're testing the most critical uncertainties first. And finally, their experiments should be good enough to maximize learning gain per dollar invested. This will be really important when we later talk about some of the tensions that the incubation team can have with the more traditional business units. But it's really all about justifying the experiments and maximizing that investment. In terms of their performance metrics, executing experiments is the main one. I mean, that's what they're there to do, what they want to see, and of course, reporting on them. And not just the successes, but also some of the failures so that you can see, so that anyone in the company or who's learning from these teams can see, that it's not just everything moving forward. Sometimes they're the people to tell the company when to close the project down. In terms of who these people are, these are kind of the people with startup mentalities, but they like the larger company because of the resources that a larger company has. They're usually unafraid to make decisions in the face of little information, so they're bold. And part of that boldness is also comfortably changing direction rapidly. They're diplomatic. We'll come back to why that's important later. And they're integrative thinkers. They're using that new information from each experiment and putting it into the next experiment and drawing implications based on that. And they're able to identify the most basic assumptions in the company and question conventional wisdom. I'm sure we all either work or have worked at companies that have some truths, why they don't do this or why they do that, that is just kind of an assumption. And is it true, or have they just not tested anything against it? That's what this person's there to do. And what I love about that is that the makeup of this person is usually someone who's been there for about a decade. They're rarely from the outside. Unlike the I2, the new business platform leader, and in Dondina's case, and a couple of the other examples in the book, there's usually someone that is brought from the outside. They're there to build the team, to manage the team, and to build the business case, explore the potential of the business concept, clarify the strategy. And this is really a strategic role. In terms of what they're doing, right? Now, that strategy is managing both inward, their direct reports, outward to other organizations within the business, and upward. They're allocating time to manage other constituents besides the I1s. They're building relationships with other corporate support functions such as purchasing, legal, R&D, PR, but their one main purpose is to allow a promising new business platform to take root and grow within the organization and become tomorrow's cash cow. In terms of what their performance metrics are, their main goal is to generate a working business model. They keep the Innovation Council up to speed. Oftentimes, it's usually thought that this person's manager, the I3, is that person, but usually when it's really getting into the weeds, the I2 is the go-to person for keeping leadership up to speed in terms of the development of the incubation teams. In terms of who these people are, it's a little difficult to say other than in terms of their makeup, but certainly brutally honest, exposed to a range of industries. I mean, that's usually the person who it comes from outside. One thing about this, the I2, which is kind of counterintuitive to the hierarchical structure we suggested before, is they need to be connected to the experiments and they can't be too far removed. So what the author suggests here is not to have too many direct reports so that you don't become the bottleneck and you're not too far removed from the experiments. This person's manager then is the I3 director of incubation. Of course, this was Dr. Mahmood Khan, who we referenced earlier. Now, what are this person's responsibilities? They're managing the portfolio of the emerging business. Their goal is, they're kind of the executive sponsor here. I mean, these are some of the quotes from the authors, but that I really loved, but they're working towards big plays. In terms of their tasks and activities, they're communicating both with their own team, the incubation platforms, but they're also looking for new opportunities for the incubation team to get involved in and to maybe pull into the incubation team. They're that strategic thinker, that manager. They're communicating to the other leaders in the company. And of course, they're telling the story. They're painting the picture. Ultimately, there's a lot of storytelling to be done. In terms of what they're measured by, it's really about bringing in the new business proposals that have been vetted and demonstrated, market enthusiasm, an operating model that works, and some level of internal commitment behind it. This is the person that's very clever about managing alternative arrangements for an emerging business. Now, that's the team. One thing that the authors highlight and that I want to highlight is kind of the tension between the incubation team and the more traditional business units within the company. One quote from an incubation leader: "We are by definition long-term thinking than the rest of the organization, which means that it always goes at the expense of today." So what is the tension all about? Short-term interest versus long-term. The good enough principle, right? The standard business units want a lot of data to make the decisions. The incubation team is just looking for enough data to get meaningful feedback. Sometimes they can be too honest. They often butt up with other parts or pockets of the business because of what we've just talked about. And I wanted to, I thought this Steve Jobs answer to this question kind of highlights that, the tension between the more traditional business units and the innovators.
Yes. Mr. Jobs, you're a bright and influential man. It's sad and clear that on several counts you've discussed, you don't know what you're talking about. I would like, for example, for you to express in clear terms how, say, Java, in any of its incarnations, addresses the ideas embodied in OpenDoc. And when you're finished with that, perhaps you could tell us what you personally have been doing for the last 7 years.
You know, you can please some of the people some of the time, but one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year? And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that? And I think that's the right path to take. I remember
So I think that's a great example of the tension between the incubation teams or the innovation teams in general, and of course the traditional business units. You can see ultimately in that case how far some of those traditional business units will take you without innovation. But one other thing to keep in mind with the incubation team is that failure is an option. Fail fast, fail often, and have a backup. And that's because twofold. One is you may not strike gold, so to speak. You might not find it. That's what testing's all about. That's what innovation's all about. But the second thing is about having a backup, because if you remember our friend Gina Bradley, and this happens time and time again with the examples in the book with the I2 business leaders, is that they move on fairly quickly after the project launched or after the project fizzled. Which kind of brings me to my last set of questions, maybe for our class to talk about, is how do you keep the the I2s long term? What do you do about the tension between the traditional business units and the innovation teams? How do you make innovation safe for the innovators? And how will we know the great innovations from the ones that could have been great but got lost somewhere along the way? I hope we can talk about these in the comments, and thanks for listening. Of course, lots of references here, mostly on the photos, to be honest. And of course, the Steve Jobs. The rest of it was straight out of the book. Have a great day.